President Cyril Ramaphosa placing the country under adjusted lockdown level 2 from today. He's urging people to get vaccinated, though, in order to safeguard their own health and enable a further opening of the economy. But with less than 50 days before the local government elections, can political parties be trusted to actually adhere to these new regulations? Let's unpack this for you now. Bring in Sandile Swanaand, I beg your pardon. He's with the Wits School of Governance, as well as Professor Benjamin Smart from the University of Johannesburg. To both our guests, thanks very much indeed for your time. And welcome to the AM report. Sandile, I wonder if I can begin with you. The information at my disposal shows that you believe that the political parties will in fact adhere to these lockdown restrictions. What are you basing this on?
First of all, let's start with Julius Malema and the EFF, who said that they would defy COVID-19 regulations. But if you look closely at their history, at the end of the day, Julius was the one who was saying that elections must be held in 2024 because he's scared of COVID-19. And also the issue of reopening of schools and so on. So the EFF, when you look at all of their statements taken together, they are people who are relatively afraid of the actual disease, the actual infection of COVID-19. So I don't think they see it as a toy with which they can play political games. On top of that...
Sorry to come in there, Sandile, I beg your pardon. Is this the same EFF that held the... I don't want to call it a march, but a gathering yesterday at Olivenhout-Bosch? Those are some of the visuals that we have of the party in the past. But the same EFF also taking a march to SAPRA's offices earlier this year. Those are two instances in recent history where a lot of people might say that their action leaves a lot to be desired.
Yes, I chose them for that very reason, that EFF has been... is probably, if there are people who are likely to disobey these rules, would have been the EFF, followed by the ANC, by the way. But what I'm also supporting this argument with is that in this recent insurrection, in the July insurrection, ANC-inspired insurrection, was... you saw that the police actually arrested people, regardless of their political affiliation and regardless of their political objectives. When you break, and Cyril Ramaphosa emphasized this yesterday, that anybody, whether you are a taxi driver, a restaurant, or a political party or a church, when you violate these regulations, you will be arrested. So my thinking is that when you are running a political campaign, the last thing you need is to have to spend several days in jail when the time is so limited for you to run the actual campaign. So I think that would be probably sufficient of a deterrent. I think the people who disobey these regulations as they stand, which carry a criminal sentence with them, will be in the minority. Overall, I think political parties will obey the regulations, including the EFF.
That's incredibly interesting, again, given what we've seen so far. But Professor Smart, let me bring you into this discussion. Are we not setting these parties up for failure, though, by expecting them to be able to adhere to these restrictions, given the nature of electioneering on any year, even a year where there's a pandemic?
I think it will be incredibly difficult for political parties to keep those numbers below 500 outdoors. I admire Prof's confidence in those parties even trying to do so, especially when Julius Malema has explicitly said that they think that restricting numbers would be contrary to free and fair elections, and they've explicitly stated that they will not be restricting numbers. They will not be trying to stop people from attending their rallies. They don't want to offend their members. And they've already held marches with thousands of people in favor of the Sinovac and Sputnik vaccines. So I do not share Prof's confidence in numbers being kept below 500, but I suppose time will tell. And of course, the way electioneering has worked, the way rallies have worked, since democracy started in South Africa, we've had tens of thousands of people attending rallies. It requires a complete paradigm shift in the way that campaigning works, and I'm not sure that the desire is there, particularly within the EFF, but we shall see with the other parties. I don't want to pick on the EFF particularly. It's just that Mr. Malema is the one who's come out and already said explicitly that we will not be listening to Mr. Ramaphosa's rules. And I think a lot really depends on the way in which these rules are enforced. And they haven't been enforced in the past. They were not enforced when the EFF had their rally for the vaccines. Very few people were arrested at Nkandla. So I think, keeping people below groups of 500 outside is extremely unlikely. And I suspect that it will not be well enforced. But time will tell.
You say it's unlikely, Prof, but is it unrealistic? And that's really what I'm trying to get at here. When the president...
I think it'll be extremely difficult for parties. I mean, so put yourself in Julius Malema's shoes. You've got thousands and thousands and thousands of people coming. How are the leadership supposed to stop supporters from attending these rallies? I think it would be difficult to put the responsibility wholly on the shoulders of the leadership too.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what I also wanted to speak about, Sandile. We will obviously focus a lot on the leaders of political parties for them to do the right things, hit the right notes. But there's something to be said about the agency of the electorate as well. I mean, people aren't forced necessarily to arrive at these gatherings, but what do we read into the fact that they do, despite the threat posed by COVID-19?
I think let me start at another place. Last year, towards the end of last year, in fact, let's just say last year, including the end of last year, there were several very successful by-elections that were held under conditions of COVID-19. We didn't hear any complaints from the Electoral Commission or from the health authorities that and these are ward-level activities. So we must not confuse what happens in national and provincial elections. This is an election where you've got to want to win a local, very local, ward-level ticket, generally speaking. And that's the main focus of these elections. And I want to add to this that our system of local government is a ward-based system. So these people have been in consultations with communities, certainly those who have been elected before as ward councillors, etc. There are community public participation processes, community consultation processes that have been happening without actually any reports of violation of COVID-19 or any of those things. So I think the evidence that is on the table so far about both by-elections that have been held very recently and also the processes of that are dictated by our laws in South Africa. So I will still say that indeed people have participated in the processes and they've used technology, they've listened to community radio stations and so on and so forth. And that is not to say there is not a reckless section in our community that will attend. I mean, we still have aftercares and funerals. All I'm saying is that will be the isolated incident and the minority, not the majority.
I wonder if you really do believe that. I mean, Sandile, we have to be honest, though. The stakes are very different for a few by-elections versus municipal elections in the entire country, especially given how charged the political landscape currently is.
Yes, the stakes, you may say the stakes are different, but the stakes actually are quite specific. The stakes are that you've got to win the ward. You cannot win the municipality generally as a whole. You need to win one ward at a time. So in that process of doing that, for instance, a certain of these parties, we'll talk about the well-known minority, smaller parties, the DA, the EFF, the Freedom Front Plus, Inkatha. These are experienced campaigners who are well known to the voting communities, who are known in the wards as well. And the contest, for instance, for the EFF, and I'm sorry to target them, and in places like Alexander Township, where they had not won a single ward, it would be foolhardy to try and launch a big campaign all over the show rather than targeting the actual wards and winning votes in the actual ward to become a ward councillor in the ward. So I don't see these very large campaigns all over the show. I think the leaders are going to be very strategic in targeting winning the actual ward. And that doesn't require you to do massive public show of support, which can be sometimes even unverifiable on the ground. For instance, the EFF has held impressive stadium filling exercises, but that has not translated into displacing the ANC, in as much as the ANC held weaker rallies. So you need to be very focused on the ground, and I think whilst rhetoric may be always radical, the actual work on the ground might actually be very down-toned, because also you don't want to be arrested for organizing illegal activities during the time that you are supposed to be winning a war.
Yeah. Professor Smart, Sandile is saying the strategy from political parties should be different. I wonder, though, whether it will be. And as you mull over that, it was the president yesterday who was also saying that he'll be back essentially in 2 weeks after gauging how these relaxed restrictions are going to fare. The obvious concern about that is that by then it might be a little too late.
Well, in terms of whether the elections will be run differently, the campaigns will be run differently, we've already heard the DA coming out saying general statements, about having to run a COVID-friendly campaign and so on and so forth. And it'll be interesting to see how that translates. I agree with the professor, though, in these particular kinds of elections, these elections are won on the ground, door-to-door campaigning. They're not necessarily won by filling stadia full of people. However, nonetheless, manifesto launches are going to happen, and if the manifesto launches happen in person and they happen outside, then that's where you're going to have the hundreds and thousands of people coming along, and you're going to have the difficulty in constraining them. I think that there are two separate questions, though. What kind of electioneering, what kind of rallies are going to be held, and how effective those kind of strategies are. And it may even benefit the EFF to put more of a focus on the door-to-door campaigning than they have in the past. So I think that this could be really problematic. I think that I think there'll be a number of super spreader events as a result of the campaign, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the case, because there's no in principle reason why each individual ward cannot be run in the same way as the by-elections. And as Prof just said, that this happens fairly responsibly. But unfortunately, that's just not what's going to happen. We know that there are going to be manifesto launches, and those launches are not all going to be online.
Absolutely. Sandile also mentions that no political party leader would want to be arrested during this time. I wonder, though, whether anybody believes that people will be arrested for flouting these lockdown restrictions. But that's the time we have this morning. Thanks very much indeed for both your indulgence. Really do appreciate it. Sandile Swanaand is from Wits University School of Governance. Also joining that discussion, Professor Benjamin Smart from the University of Johannesburg. Once again, to both of you, thanks very much indeed.